The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by Fred LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsee, where wisdom meets business.
Hi, I'm Fred. I'm the executive.
And I'm Kristina, and I am the Mystic, and welcome to the Executive and the Mystic podcast, where wisdom meets business. If you would like, subscribe, like, and interact with us in order to be able to actually have other people find us, we would really appreciate it. I would like to introduce my amazing co-host today. This is Fred LeFranc. He is a chaos strategist, but he is also someone who loves to constantly be curious and cultivate the most amazing growth mindset that I think out of anybody I've ever met, is one of the most inspiring views of constantly being a lifelong learner. And I'm honored for you to be my co-host here today, Fred.
Oh, thank you. That's very sweet of you. And I'm going to introduce Kristina Wiltsee, who is a perspective alchemist, which means her job is to help all of us learn to see our lives and the life outside of us in different ways. And that's been all very, very helpful to me. So with that said, Kristina, what are we talking about today?
So today we are going to talk about leadership in uncertain times. We have this experience of, what it means to have to be a leader of whether it's a company or whether it's your family or whether it's yourself, in any way in which we evoke leadership, and how is it that we can cultivate the tools within us, and what is it that we can try and evoke in uncertain times to be able to navigate these times in a very different way.
Right.
So, Fred, do you want to start off and talk to us about what we mean by uncertain times?
Well, uncertain times is anything that occurs outside of us that probably was unexpected, either in scope, degree, or just the fact that it exists. A good example would be COVID. People, we want to forget about it now, but we all remember when all of a sudden that fateful weekend came about where everything got shut down. Nobody expected that. And you had to be prepared for that. And how can you be prepared, which we're going to talk about today, that you actually can be somewhat prepared for the unknown. Or it could be an economic event. It could be losing a big customer. In the restaurant business, it could be a really bad food poisoning incident. Or in your family, it could be health. Or you find out that your kid is really a bad kid in school. Anything that just sort of jars your reality that you got to go, whoa, wait a minute, what's happening here? And that's the definition I would use of an external event that creates uncertain times.
Yes. The way that I like to do it is I always like to live in analogies, is that for the most part, we have a record or a CD, depending on wherever time you grow up. We have an album that we are playing every day, and it's really it's kind of the same one every time. Sometimes we might go on vacation and play a different one for a certain period of time, and we're prepared for that, to be able to go and be like, hey, I'm going to put on this different album and I'm going to listen to this. And the way that your family operates, the way that you operate, the way that your company operates, you're just listening to this kind of same song. It's like business as usual, right? BAU, as we know. And then what happens is that we get this bigger song that starts to come in, and we can't ignore it because it's causing disharmony with our song, right? We can't concentrate on our song because our attention is constantly being pulled out to this other larger meta song that we don't necessarily have the ability to turn down the volume on, unless we choose to either ignore it, or, as many leaders know in business, you can't ignore things like tariffs. That's a great example of a meta song that's happened in the United States here in the last year that greatly affects businesses that they have no control over. People are not going to change U.S. policy, but they have to deal with the consequences of that, which is, what we do in our life all the time is we're constantly readjusting to new external circumstances and doing our best to create internal padding to be able to shock absorb a lot of those experiences. So, Fred, you have a kind of these three qualities that you often talk about when it comes to like what it means to move forward with coherence and what it means to move forward with action. Certainty, courage, and commitment. Can you tell us about that and how you've used that in examples?
Well, I think what happens when something unexpected occurs, depending on who you are and what state you're in, it can really take us by surprise. And one of the things, the human qualities that we have, the biggest one is free will. We have a choice to choose a response, or we can just react. Animals react on instinct, and people to some extent can do that as well. And if we're conditioned in our thinking, we will just react, right? And so part of the exploration is to be aware that all of a sudden you're really getting riled up about something because you don't know. It happens in an instant. You'll be lost for an hour in this state of fear and panic and not even be aware of that. You have shallow breathing, you might be tense or whatever the case may be. And so the certainty is to begin to explore what is it that's going on inside of me? What's triggering this? Of course, the event's clear. Something happened on here, but why is it affecting me so profoundly? And there's an old expression that says you may be certain, but you may not be right. But the certainty comes around about exploring what is this happening, getting an understanding of the playing field. And there's a tendency for many people to catastrophize and to pick up the rope and go down a rabbit hole of something that's just going to be horrible. There's nothing wrong with exploring that as a scenario. What's wrong is staying stuck in it. And what you want to do, and we shared this on a previous episode, is go through the exercise of worst, better, best in terms of what's the worst that could happen, what's the best that could happen, and somewhere in the middle is better, which is got to give up some ground, but you can live with it. None of us want the worst that could happen to occur. We can survive that, but painfully so. And the other expression I talk about is, pain is inevitable, but suffering's optional. And suffering is when you hang on to something well past the point you need to do it and just let it go and move on. Because if you move forward with some certainty, at least I have a sense of where I'm at, I have a plan of what I'm going to do, then that's when courage kicks in. Okay, I'm going to move forward, one shaky foot after the other. One of my favorite definitions of courage is that courage is not the absence of fear. It's the ability to carry out with dignity in spite of the fear. Okay. That's really what it comes down to. And as a leader, because you're not just doing this for yourself. I mean, clearly you're doing this for yourself, but you're a leader of your family, potentially, leader of your business, leader of your team. You want to make sure, okay, gang, here's how I've seen it. Let me elicit more input from you. Now, okay, we got it. Let's move forward. And then the commitment is to just really stay to the course, be observant to all the external signals to make sure you're course correcting. We talked in a previous episode about life is a lot like sailing. You don't sail in a straight line. You have to tack because you control the winds and the current. And these are the things that can at least get you in a state of being centered and calm within yourself to move forward still into the unknown, but not as fearful because you're eliminating the boogeyman.
Right, right. That is, and the ability to evoke those states is it for some people. They're able to kind of just do it off the cuff. They're like, oh, I have to have commitment right now. I know that courage and commitment are really important. Uh, and sometimes it's hard to evoke those states. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I really want to know, Fred, you have navigated through a lot of difficult times for companies, even if it may not have been uncertain times. You talked about COVID and what it was like to kind of move the bakery through that period, but like you've navigated a lot of companies through uncertain times. Can you tell us some stories about like what it is and how you've seen certainty, courage, and commitment really work for CEOs who are in transition?
Yeah, well, we've done a lot of turnaround work. We've done a lot of growth work. We've also done a lot of turnaround work. And in the turnaround work, that's basically when someone comes up and says, we're not getting the results we want, generally financial. Sales are down, profits are down, we're losing quality people, whatever the case may be. And so I'm used to walking into circumstances like that. And I
Yeah.
basically do the similar process. First off, the number one thing is truth telling. Okay. Now, what does truth telling mean? A lot of leaders, for whatever reason, hold back information from their team for fear of scaring them. Um, and that's a mistake. That's the initial instinct, and that's the mistake. What I've learned is it's really important to be honest with people. Now, you don't have to scare them. You don't say we're going to go bankrupt or anything like that, but you can say we're not performing well and we need to change this. I need your help in changing this. And asking for help and being truthful about what's going on transparently is a really important part of it because I took over a company that declared bankruptcy 5 days later because the government froze their funds. They didn't pay their payroll taxes. They didn't tell anybody anything. And so there was all of a sudden on the front page of the LA Times, the company's bankrupt. And that's how employees found out that they had a problem. Or their vendors called them and said, you're bankrupt. We can't deliver to you. That's not helpful. So that's really important is to be truthful and transparent in all your communications with people. And then communication in of itself is another thing. There's an interesting fact. In World War II, there was something called the Berlin Airlift. After World War II was over, Berlin was divided by the Russians and the Americans. And the Russians cut off all ground access, and they were basically starving the population. So the Americans started sending planes in with food and supplies to Berlin. One problem: Berlin was socked by fog most of the time, and a lot of planes would crash. And what they discovered was that, and this is the early days of instrument flying, it's not like what we have now, that if the pilot was spoken to by the control tower just regularly, how's it going? How you doing? So far and so on. It kept the pilots centered and focused on what they wanted to do. Otherwise, they would get disoriented, and that's why they crashed. And that's exactly what happens when you're going through uncertainty. You're flying through the fog, okay? And if you're flying through the fog with no instruments, that's one problem. But you also have to fly through the fog, communication, reinforcement, touching base. And that's very important. So the practice, quite frankly, simple is just huddles. You know,
Mhm.
when I took over a company during COVID, we had daily huddles for 15 minutes, okay, with all the senior leaders on the team, on the call for 15 minutes. This is what's happening today. This is what we're focused on, because you got waves of COVID coming in, losing customers, all sorts of stuff was going on. And that 15 minutes every single day, that cadence of communication created a comfort and a touch point for people to have.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And I think that you talk about courage, and what strikes me is that if shame, which is obviously a very key, clear thing that a lot of us feel, and it's actually, I would say, almost native to the experience of hierarchy, is shame, right? Shame is a very key aspect of that structure, right? Like when we have hierarchies, oftentimes they are kept in place by shame. So whether you're at the top of the hierarchy and you're afraid of going down and you feel like you might be ashamed of what happened or what you didn't do or how you didn't lead, obviously there's also survival that comes into that. But it's a very key tool that we use to keep ourselves in place, and we also use to keep ourselves quiet, right? That we use to keep ourselves not communicating in the way that we need to. And it's in these times the real courage to face your shame, right? To face the potential of, yes, I didn't do this right, or no, I didn't do this right, makes it so that you are addressing something early. You're doing an early intervention, right? You're doing an early intervention as much as possible. The faster that you can deal with the potential of what you are afraid of happening, especially shame and what you may be shameful of happen, is that key step of courage, I feel like, in a lot of ways.
Well, a circumstance happens when someone's CEO, especially with new CEOs. They feel that the position demands that they have all the answers, and it can't. But that's something that people do. That's a condition they have in their mind, and therefore, if there's something that they feel weak or remiss in, they try and hide that. But everyone will know anyway. And that's, we worked with a CEO in a company. We went to do the assessment, and we do an assessment. We send out a request for information, an RFI, and we get hundreds of documents in every area of the business. Finance, administration, culinary, operations, training, human resource, on and on and on and on. And this CEO insisted that no document could be released to us without his review. Well, you can only imagine that it's impractical. So like in 2 weeks, I got 10 documents, and I go, we can't do our job. And he was just trying to control everything for fear that something would come out that he wasn't doing. Number one, the company was already wasn't performing well. Nobody was blaming him, but he was the leader. And the only way we could help is to have full transparency. And that is a condition that I found with a lot of, I don't want to be pejorative, but I don't know, immature, unenlightened CEOs. On the other hand, I've worked with some CEOs who say, you know what? I'm doing the best that I can. I'm obviously missing something. Please come in and help me see something that I can't see. And they're a delight to work with because there's no defensiveness. They're welcoming the interaction. They also become active participants in uncovering what could be the issues that could be holding them at bay. Because they're not always sins of commission. They could be sins of omission because they don't know to do certain things. The advantage we have is we've seen so many best practices. We can bring that into the organization to say, have you considered trying this? It's always ironic to me when we do our presentations to the leadership team and the board, and they go, God, this is fantastic information. Where did you get it? I go, we got it from you. Uh, and, and, and they're like, what do you mean? Well, and what happens in many companies is that they get sort of locked into these silos or neural pathways that information has to go a certain way. But when we go in, we talk to everybody at all levels of the organization, and we're open minded. We don't care where a good idea comes from. And a lot of the times, the employees have got the answers to the problems, but no one ever asks them. We do. And that's part of that certainty. Let's go in there and ask people. Let's for help. We do cultural assessments. We do operational surveys to get feedback. In one organization, a very large organization, we sent out surveys to a lot of their restaurants, and then we got basically a scorecard back for all the various departments in the company: HR, culinary, operating, that whole thing. And there was a couple departments that did not score well. Again, mostly communication was the big problem, so that the things get launched without anyone really knowing it. And it was always a shock. Or we go into a restaurant and open up a storeroom and find it full of marketing material that had never been used. It had been received and thrown in there and never used because no one ever explained to them the importance of using it, why it should be used, where to place it. Operations has responsibility there too. It's a cross-functional relationship. It's not just one person, but that is something that is sadly very common.
Okay, okay, that's fascinating, and also makes a lot of sense. I've had a similar experience, right? I've kind of experienced the antithesis. I've been in the middle of some pretty large mergers, and the experience of what it means to not only to be working without any of those things, right? Without any certain with you're dealing with uncertainty. You don't know whether or not you have the right to say something, or you're going to step on somebody's toes, or no one's going to approve this. And so you just sit in this waffly world of hemming and hawing back and forth, talking about what really should be done in these radical ideas. And every single one of those radical ideas gets kicked down, oh no, we can't do that. Right. Because everybody's dealing in such a state of uncertainty, and there's such a lack of leadership that's going around to be like, yes, this is where you can innovate, right? And this is where you can't. Frankly, we're not going to shift the ERP, or we're not going to shift the this or that. This is where we can innovate. How do we put all of our resources into the places that we know can shift change? I'll work on whether or not we can, the leader is saying, well, I'm going to work on this other thing as to whether or not I can shift something that's bigger going on, but that is, company wide and maybe outside of our division or something along those lines. Let's put all of our effort to innovate in this space. It's a fascinating thing, that because I remember years ago, there's this brilliant learning consultant, and she said to me, she said, innovation is one of our values, but we don't want people to innovate on our process all the time, right? Like, it has a lane
Right.
and it has a place, and it's not supposed to be everywhere all the
That's
time.
that's a great point. And part of that is that I always find it fascinating when there's trouble in a business, politics takes over because it's this survival instinct. I gotta protect my position, my prestige. And when you have a company that's focused on the internal power struggles or politics of it, and they lose focus of their ultimate client, that's a problem. The healthy companies have an relenting focus and obsession with customer or guest satisfaction. And when you're going through uncertainty, you got to make sure that the people you're serving are being taken care of first and foremost. That's why I like the stakeholder mentality that conscious capital talks about, because it's a win-win-win-win-win. I'm taking care of my employees, I'm taking care of my customers and my guests, I'm taking care of my vendors, I'm taking care of the community I serve them, I'm taking care of the planet. Whatever your larger constituency is to make sure they all can win. And the businesses that align with everyone winning are the ones that thrive the best because it's a self-reinforcing loop, right? No one's at this bay. If you're a chemical company, you're pouring toxin fluids into a river stream, you're poisoning the environment, ultimately poisoning the community you're working with, and Aaron Brockovich kind of stuff. That's not good for anybody. Okay? And then they start protecting that their right to kill people. And as crazy as that sounds, sadly it occurs. And that's what you want to try and avoid. It's really hard to joyfully say, I screwed up. I mean, it's just not human nature. And people say, oh, you got to learn from your mistakes. But there's a to that adage, there's a precursor. So you first got to admit the mistake before you can learn from it. If you're always in denial about making mistakes, you're never going to learn anything. And life has a way of slopping you around, saying, "Oh, you didn't want to learn the lesson the first time? Here, try this on for time." And that's the part of it that you want to try and do. It's fascinating to me that once we get into an organization and help people feel safe, because we're going to be truthful with them. We know we're going to be fair. We're going to be objective. And even if it includes layoffs and things like that, how you handle that with dignity and with respect and a soft place to land always makes a big difference, because the people who aren't let go are observing the ones that were. You may not have been hit by that bullet, but you heard it whizzing by your ear. And that's terrifying in of itself. And you get a survivor's guilt. And part of what we try and do is make sure that culturally people feel emotionally safe and secure, and to treat the people that they've worked with, their colleagues who may no longer be there, with dignity and respect as well. No one's going to airbrush them out of the photo in the company website, right? It is a circumstance. Sadly, nowadays, you just have to do it. And part of it is that the rate of change in the world is happening so fast, and I'm sorry, I don't know anyone who can keep up with the rate of change. I mean, I'm pretty good at change, and my business title is chaos strategist. I'm pretty good at that. But you know what? It's still pretty overwhelming. I always say metaphorically, we are in a whitewater world. It's class 5 waves all the time, and you're going to go over waterfalls, you're going to hit a rock, you're going to do all this craziness and turbulence. And that's just the state of the world. We're a tweet away from disaster. Something's always going on. And this is where preparing yourself for the unknown is a practice that I think is healthy for the individual and for the organization. And Kristina, you had shared some things that people can do to prepare for the unknown by embracing something that they be new. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. But first, let's go to a break for our sponsor, which is Results Through Strategy. This episode is brought to you by Results Through Strategy. Since 2006, RTS has been the go-to partner for restaurants and food service brands navigating growth, transformation, or recovery. Their team of seasoned industry veterans helps companies rediscover their purpose, realign with their values, and implement strategies that build measurable, sustainable performance. All right, we are back. And we're going to be talking about now is, what are the practices that you can do which are going to help you deal with uncertain times, right? Because we talked about the attitude of certainty and commitment and courage and what it means to be able to deal with that in the very moment. How are you doing things with dignity? How are you being courageous to be able to do the right things? And I want to talk about these kind of auxiliary things and practices that you can do to really help you get into that state. And I think this is a really important conversation to have in particular, because we cultivate our physical strength. We cultivate our mental strength by, doing crossword puzzles or maybe doing mindfulness meditation. But we don't have a tendency to cultivate and work out our emotional, spiritual states. And so I want to talk a little bit about how everyone here can deal with this, especially if you're feeling a lot of anxiety, if you're feeling a lot of fear about everything that's going on at the moment, or if you feel that way on a regular basis. It's like, what are the practices that you can do to really work that muscle, so that I'm not talking about trauma work. I'm talking about, these are what I would call light practices, right? They're practices that aren't about undoing your trauma. They're about, what are the states that you cultivate here and now. So the first one I want to talk about is a growth mindset. We've talked about a growth mindset, Fred, right? Many times, right? And we talk about how in so many ways this podcast is seeking people and really resonates with people with a growth mindset, right? Because it's like, yes, I am willing and curious to see what other things are out there. And one of the things that I like to say when someone says, "Oh, well, that's such a, it's jargony, or it's so hackneyed, like it's cliche. What's a growth mindset?" And I say, we don't call foodies having a growth mindset, but foodies have a growth mindset towards food, towards, as you mentioned, Fred, right? Taste and smell, right? We have people who are listening to new albums all the time, which is you as well. I'm kind of a traditionalist when it comes to music, and I love to listen to albums that I've listened to before. I will get into a growth mindset when it comes to hearing new albums. But as a kid, I had to cultivate that experience of, I'm going to listen to this album and I'm going to listen to it all the way through. How long is it going to take me to just get to my 4 favorite tracks and skip over everything else? Right. You were telling me about, you did something this week, right? With a new album.
Yeah, I'm an old Talking Heads fan, and David Byrne has a new album out with a female artist called St. Andrew. And so,
St. Vincent, yeah.
I'm sorry,
Hmm.
not St. Andrew, St. Vincent. And I listened to the new album, and it was very different, and but I listened to it all the way. I learned long time ago, because I'm a big music fan. You got to listen to an album at least twice. The first time,
Hmm.
you got to get away with, and then the second time you do it. And if you really want to if you really start liking it, the third time and then beyond that, it goes great. So,
Right.
and that's, what I love about what you're saying is that the unknown that happens unexpectedly can be bad. But what you're saying is put yourself in a position to learn to embrace the unknown when things aren't necessarily bad. You're choosing the new experience, a new restaurant for the olfactory and the taste, an album for sound, or it could be a visual experience, and that you train your mind to be open and intellectually curious. And intellectual curiosity, I'd say, is one great quality that all leaders should have. Because if you're not, my God, this world's changing so rapidly. You got to at least be curious a little bit. It's like right now, AI, right? Everyone's talking about AI, and it's changing our civilization in ways that we can't even imagine. We're in the early
Yeah.
innings of AI, and it's already been profound. If you're not leaning in to learn more about it, you're going to be in trouble, period. It's just because it's just going to become a must have. It's going to be a life skill. Cooking is now a hobby. It used to be a life skill, but thanks to the restaurant business, you don't have to know how to cook. You just got to be able to out with a credit card and go to a restaurant. Using a computer is a life skill. Using AI is going to be a life skill. And other things that were once considered that can become hobbies. And that's really, really important. So your idea of exposing ourselves in an intentional way to embrace and at least accept new things. You're going to like it initially, but it's learning to look at it with curiosity, which you said earlier.
Hmm.
You're in a state of fear. Being curious, so what am I afraid of, is the first question to ask. And then sometimes you find out that it's just the lens you're looking at. I saw an example a long time ago where someone had focused on a screen on a monster's face, and it was terrifying. But when you panned out, it turned out to be a movie set. And so sometimes by panning out and getting a bigger perspective of the context, what you thought was fearful was really not. It was just a small mirror image of something much that was part of something greater that was not scary at all.
Yeah, yeah. And so what we recognize is that you have to condition yourself for change, right? This is kind of a we could, when you're in the middle of uncertain times, that might be a very difficult thing to do because you may already have your stress response triggered. You're not able to go and enjoy travel or and go a new restaurant or anything like that. This is a lifelong practice that we're talking about when we talk about cultivating a growth mindset, which is cultivating the ability to handle the unfamiliar, right? Like that's what you're doing. You're handling the unfamiliar and you are becoming an expert at handling it so that no matter good or bad, you're able to handle it because change in and of itself is difficult for many people to practice. And that's a funny thing. Like mindfulness meditation, there are so many different types of meditation. Mindfulness meditation is looking at the contents of the mind, and it's kind of a practice. The way that I see it is kind of the practice of developing the observer of the mind, right? Which is a wonderful thing because it gives you perspective, right? That type of meditation gives you perspective because you can see your own mind for what it is, as big or as small or as, neurotic as it's being.
Right.
Other meditations work on not just looking at the contents of the mind. That's almost the first step, but they look at, right, developing equanimity, which is more the practice of being okay with change in the body and what it feels like. Like that's literally the practice. And so, the practice of mindfulness is 1/10 of a practice that's actually all about, can you deal with change?
Right.
How do you feel with it? Right.
Yeah.
And so cultivating a mindset for change and cultivating a mindset to accept the unfamiliar is one step of this. You mentioned, Fred, this really key other aspect, which is what I like to call the opposites practice. It's the meta. It's basically cultivating meta states. I mentioned earlier about how we can lift weights for muscles. We can run to be able to condition our heart. We can do mindfulness meditation in order to be able to look at the contents of our own mind and develop an observer mentality or to get out of ruminating thoughts. But we don't spend a lot of time. We spend a lot of us can spend a lot of time cultivating states of anxiety without even really meaning to. It's a little bit like you can imagine a garden and something happens in which you learn that anxiety is something that you want that comes up in your garden and you never ever weed it. You never ever decide to go out and pull up those weeds and choose to grow something different in that space, right? Knowing that we have a lot of, I think of our whole system as having a lot of real estate. There's a lot of empty ground. And as anybody who's had land knows, if you get rid of the grass, anything is going to grow there, right? Unless you're very intentional about what is going to grow there. Fred mentioned this idea of curiosity and fear. When we are, that's the first opposite I want to talk about. When we have fear, we have this ability to say, I'm going to be fearful about something and I'm going to constrict my body and it's going to feel like I don't even know what's going on. I feel very small. I feel like everything, the walls are closing in around me. Either I'm afraid of shame, I'm afraid of failure, I'm afraid of anything, right? What, fill in the blank. When you are curious about fear, that's when you're able to freely do things like worse, better, best, right? When you are curious about how you can fail, when you are curious about how you did fail, right? When you are in a state of curiosity, it is an opposing force to fear. There's a relaxation in the body, there's a relaxation in the mind, and there's a willingness to say, I'm actually okay with this. I am directly opposing the content of fear.
No, we had a whole episode on worst, better, best, and that's the best solution I have found in my life. When something happens that's unexpected that initially triggers fear in me, the curiosity is then is, okay, what is the worst that could happen? And exploring that deeply, and then ask yourself a very powerful question: can I survive that? The answer is always yes. I'd rather not, but it's always yes. And then go to best. What's the best that could happen? Can I survive that? Which means I won't self-sabotage. And then ultimately end up in the middle, which is better. And what better is why. There's the worst side of better and there's the best side of better. You always want to end up at the best side of better. It's things that you can live with, even though there's some sacrifice. And that's important. And that's why I loved your idea of training yourself to be open to new things that are uncertain, that you can, be it a song, food, whatever the case may be. I mean, I just got back from India, as you know, and I toured temples that were 1,500 to 3,500 years old. So going back in time, we dressed in native garb and everything was different. Everything. There was nothing that was familiar there at all. And because of the willingness to experience the unknown in a safe way, after a few days, it felt more familiar. And, a week later, it was even better. 2 weeks later, I was there for a couple of weeks. So it's like, oh, I know exactly what to do here. I know the whole path. I know this, I know that. So when I got back to the U.S., my life here was unfamiliar. And I thought it was wonderful because I go, oh, now I can look at my life here and say, wait a minute, I'm not going to step back into a conditioned life. I can say, what do I want to stop doing? What do I want to start doing? What do I want to continue to do? And make an intentional choice. Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about how 85 to 90% of our thoughts every single day are the same ones we had yesterday. So we're always living in the past.
Yes.
You get up, you go to the bathroom, you go make your
That's that album. Yep.
Yeah, you're back, and very few new thoughts really enter in. And if you really consider that, he's absolutely right. So if you want to bring about a change in your life or your business for the better, then you've got to start moving into the future state of what you want to try and do and get new neural pathways. The beautiful thing about the human mind is that you can develop brand new neural pathways, though the old ones are like ruts in the road. You have a tendency to fall right back into that same rut, but you can create a new one. But it takes effort, it takes intention, it takes self-awareness.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it's a really key thing, because what we recognize is that when you are, we really underestimate exactly what it is that we are cultivating at any given time. And so, we talk about this idea of cultivating your your comfort with the unfamiliar, right? With the uncertain. We're talking about this idea of facing fear with curiosity. Another one of these key opposite meta states is gratitude and anxiety. And this is one that I learned firsthand. It's a bit of a mystical moment, and I thought it was actually surprising the place that I was in Rome at the time. I was staying in the Vatican City, and I was staying in this little apartment. It's like, I feel like it was, it was a walk up, and it was like 6 stories up. And, we had been staying in Italy for a month. We had all our luggage. It was just this huge, huge moment of just having to like go up and down these stairs to be able to get all our luggage up here. And we finally got to sleep, and it's boiling hot in this apartment. And, and so I go to sleep, just totally crash out. I wake up in the middle of the night, and I am overcome with this experience of no anxiety in my body whatsoever. It was one of those transcendent experiences. I kind of like to think of it as, all the people who had cultivated this space of prayer or gratitude or something along those lines. That just little bubble just happened to hit me while I was in the middle of my sleep. And I got to experience this moment with no anxiety in my body whatsoever. It was completely relaxed, right? Despite the fact that I was in a completely unfamiliar environment, despite the fact that I was all these different things. And what I noticed in that moment was that my body was filled with gratitude. And when my body was filled with gratitude, I had no room at all for anxiety, because the gratitude was this absolute presence in the moment. And the anxiety wanted to pull me into the future to think about something that I wasn't happy about that could happen in the future, or to worry about something here, to worry about something that was not in my present moment. But when I had a strong enough conviction, or when this bubble of gratitude just hit me in the back of the head while I was in the middle of sleeping, right? All the anxiety left my body. And so since then, I've been intentionally cultivating this space of gratitude. And I don't mean gratitude. Gratitude journals are a wonderful first step. Being able to figure out how you feel gratitude in your body, because it is a feeling for a lot of people. How do you experience gratitude in your body, Fred?
The heart.
Yeah. What is it like is it like a warmth? Is it like a,
Warmth. Yeah, because a lot of what I do is to create a feeling of gratitude for that which I want in my life. And I start by focusing on people that I love so that I get heart
Mhm.
centered, and you get heart mind coherence, and then you go from there. Absolutely.
Right. And so I feel the same thing. I feel a warmth. I'm a kinesthetic person, so feeling is very important for me. But oftentimes I will use the word gratitude as if it's like an icon and you're pushing the button, like, thank you, right? And it's like all of a sudden that warmth will turn on because I've cultivated that space within me. Or I will think of something or someone that I'm grateful for. That's what gratitude journals are good for, and
Yep.
things like that. But the more that you practice this, you get into the advanced, intermediate, and advanced levels, which say I have indiscriminate gratitude for what I want, what I don't want. And we've talked about this before: what I want, what I don't want, what I have, what I don't have.
Right.
And all of a sudden, the more that you practice that, the more the present moment becomes accessible, and then the anxiety can disappear.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep. And then I also wanted to talk a couple of other opposites that I'll just talk about, that I like to teach people about when I work with them when they're in these difficult, uncertain times. One is rumination. Rumination is one of those that is the way that I think of it is that imagine that you have all this energy in your body to act, and you have all this heightened emotion in your body, and you are used to rewiring your circuitry so all that energy goes into your mind, and so your mind has no choice but to think of catastrophic thoughts. Anytime you have a conversation with somebody who is alive and not in the room with you, and you're having a full conversation with them, you're ruminating and you need to stop. Right? Just stop. Right? It's a rule, general rule, don't do that. But all of that energy has been moved into your brain, and you need to move it back into your body. And you do that by moving your body. You do that by running, by going out and exerting yourself, by playing pickleball, by having a really good walk, long walk, right? Go take your animals, do whatever you need to do. Do something in your body. And what you will do is you will redirect that energy from your head back down into your body.
That's good practice.
Yep.
That's great.
Yep. And then the last one, we talk about coherence a lot, and we talk about what it feels like to feel cognitive dissonance, and what it feels like to feel this indecisiveness, right? This idea of like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. I feel like I'm kind of all in a whirlwind. You might not even be ruminating. You just might be feeling a lot of discomfort in your body and a lot of indecisiveness about what is the next step to go forward. That is when you can use I would recommend using all of these tools to see if you can pinpoint if you're having a maelstrom of anxiety and fear and this and that, but also recognize that indecisiveness is oftentimes because you are going to the wrong sage within your body for the answer. And you need to be going to another one. There is you've been going to the sage of deep thinking or overthinking, and your job is to go to a different sage. There's the fear of the gut, the enteric body, or there's the sage of the heart. And as we talk about with coherence a lot, that what we know is that the Maha Guru, if you want to say the great sage of the system, is the heart. Right. And all the other ones should be subservient to that. And the more that you can get into coherence, you can then access the state of certainty, commitment, and courage in uncertain times.
Perfect. Heart, head, and gut. That's important. That's what you're trying to do. Well, this has been a great conversation, and we hope that our listeners have found it enjoyable, entertaining, educational. And feel free to send us commentary. People have already. Let us know what other things you want to talk about. And by the way, pretty soon we're going to start having guests on. Talking to them about some of the things we've been exploring for the last few weeks. So thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in the future.
The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by Fred LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsee, where wisdom meets business.